Which Side Podcast is a proud member of the Which Side Media Collective.
This week's episode is sponsored by Tiffany Young.
Yeah, that sounds super familiar.
Hey, yeah, we just had her on. She's from Ducks and Clucks
Animal Sanctuary.
So check her out, listen to her episode, and follow her on Facebook. Help her out.
And you can sponsor an episode as well. You can go to whichsidepodcast.com and donate at least $10, because $10 is how much it costs for us to make an episode for you.
This is episode 89. This week we have Mike XVX.
Yeah, Mike has a lot of great musical projects, and he's helped out with a lot of animal rights organizations, including Sea Shepherd. We're going to throw on one of his songs towards the end, so stay tuned.
Yeah, from his new project, his acoustic project, Mike XVX, right?
Yeah.
His album is available at mikexvx.bandcamp.com. Hey, Jordan, do you have any news or events this week?
Yeah, you might have recently heard in Salt Lake, a police officer went into a private fenced and gated backyard around June, and they were allegedly searching for a missing child, and they ended up shooting a dog instead.
Oh, Weimerheimer, right? Is that what they're called?
I think so, yeah.
They're like the most docile, breed of dogs there are.
And so this has actually been a lot of rallying around this lately. Justice for Geist. They want some accountability with the police officer.
You know, my question is why is the police officer's first response pulling a gun and firing? What pisses me off the most about this, the actual officer stated he didn't realize it would kill the dog. Really, if you're pulling a gun and pulling a trigger and you don't realize that it's a fucking lethal consequence, you shouldn't have a goddamn gun.
It's fucking absurd. But actually, Chuck from 643.
Oh yeah, he has that protectmypooch.com.
Right?
Yeah.
He's creating signs, and you can get them. I think they're
$5.99.
But yeah, Chuck from 643 is actually making signs now. Protectmypooch.com.
Yeah, I think they're awesome because it does a couple things for you really quickly. It's like, hey, no trespassing here, and then there's a big notice to law enforcement that you don't consent to searches, and there's a dog on the premise, so if you are going to search, get animal control.
And what's really awesome is that a portion of the proceeds are donated to animal advocacy groups, so that's awesome.
No, so seriously, go to his website, protectmypooch.com. Get one if you have a dog, or a cat, or an armadillo.
But it said dog on premise on the sign.
Yeah, but I would confuse an armadillo for a dog.
Protectmypooch.com?
Yeah, if you buy one, just, hey, tell them you heard it from us, because, that'd be sweet. The slingshot this week. July 27th, 1915. The president of Haiti has 167 political prisoners killed. Subsequently, he is killed by a Haitian mass protest the next day.
Wow.
That's some swift fucking action.
Really, it is.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that is crazy. Hey, hope you guys enjoy this one.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going?
It's pretty Jordan. Good. How are you?
Good.
I'm Jeremy, by the way.
Nice to meet you, Jeremy.
Nice to meet you as well. So, what kind of tea did you get?
I made some mate this morning, which is kind of my go-to tea, but I consider myself a bit of a tea snob, and so I generally like to keep 4 or 5 different kinds around, depending on the mood that I'm in, but this morning is a mate morning, so...
I'm not a huge mate fan. Oolong's my go-to.
Yeah, oolong's a good one. if I'm in the right mood for it, like I usually like to go for like a stronger black tea, like an Earl Grey or an Irish breakfast tea. But that normally I can only ever have with like a lot of like soy creamer and sugar and stuff. So
Oh, you can't put sugar in your tea. The hell's wrong with you?
I don't know. I mean, it's just my style sometimes, I guess. You know.
I like a really good double Bergamot Earl Grey. Oh, so good.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I like tea too, if you can't tell.
yeah. No, that's good.
Well,
I've never really been.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I've never really been a big coffee fan, and I tried to like it when I was young, and like a lot of other people now, like people are coffee obsessed. They get coffee tattoos and things like that, and I just never really understood the appeal, just because the taste was just so bad to me and just so bitter that I could never enjoy it. So I never really understood that. I guess that sensation that's swept over activist communities over the last few years. So.
Yeah, I've never been a coffee fan either. It's just it's like just always burnt.
Yeah.
Flavor. It's
Yeah,
I'm-
absolutely.
I'm definitely on both sides of the fence. I like coffee and I like tea, but I like espresso. I like latte. I don't like drip very much
Yeah.
for coffee, and then tea. I don't know. I like an oolong, and I like Genmai cha is probably my favorite, even though it's a weird one.
Yeah.
Have you ever tried a milk oolong?
No, I don't think so.
They're amazing. It gets the milk name because it naturally produces extra lactose, and so it has a creamy flavor without having to add any cream to it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing shit.
So it's vegan.
It is vegan, yes, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we have if y'all ever visit Portland, we have a pretty big tea house here called Townsend's that's pretty awesome, and they have like 100 different kinds of teas, and I'm slowly just making my way through the list and trying all of them. So
Awesome.
Yeah, if they have a milk oolong, definitely put that on your list to try.
yeah, I'll give that a try.
Or hibiscus.
I love any hibiscus teas. Yeah, hibiscus is great.
Yeah, definitely.
This sounds like really ridiculous, and I know this is like weird tea talk time, but I really want to try a vegan butter tea, like the Tibetan butter teas.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that before. I used to work in a Thai restaurant, and we had like a really big, extensive like tea selection, and there was some really expensive teas that were like $25 a pot.
Wow.
And one of the great things about working there is you could have whatever tea you wanted on shift, and so I'd always, of course, take the most expensive teas down and try those ones, and just be drinking those all day. But the thing is like I couldn't tell the difference between like the $25 pot of oolong, like monkey picked oolong or whatever, to like the $5 pot of green tea. It tasted almost exactly the same to me, and I was just like, am I missing something? I don't know. Like people throw away a lot of money on this stuff, so.
What's crazy about oolong is that it has such a wide range of fermentation because it's like anywhere between I think 15 and 85 or 65% fermented, somewhere around there. I can't remember the total numbers. So it can be like really close to a green or really close to a black or somewhere in between. So you never know what you're really going to get.
Yeah, and the funny thing is what I noticed when I was drinking like the really expensive teas, like really expensive green teas especially, it all just ended up tasting a little bit like with like a hint of popcorn taste to it. It was like, and that's what I thought. I mean, maybe I don't have like a refined palate or anything, but whenever I drink it, I just like, it tastes like I'm just drinking a bowl of popcorn or something.
So, have you tried Genmai cha?
Yeah,
that one pretty much has popped rice in it.
Yeah,
a lot of the time.
I'm not a fan,
but I like it. It just has that roasted flavor to it. So, but it's a green tea for sure. And the popcorn. That's why I brought it up, Jeremy. He's looking at me like, "What the fuck are you talking?"
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with tea and books are things that I could just talk about forever, and like I get kind of tangential about both things whenever I start a conversation about them. So, yeah.
The thing with me with teas, since we're talking about teas, is like I'm poor and like I can't really afford the really good tea, so I have to like find and settle for shit teas that I can drink all the time.
Yeah,
because I'm like 8 cups a day usually, 6 to 8 cups a day.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I typically go for like kind of the off-brand mate that you can find at some stores. You know, it's a lot cheaper, and there's been times too when I've had people come through and visit, and they're always just like, oh yeah, that's the better one anyway, like this one, like no one knows about it because it's like in a weird package or whatever. And that's usually the brand I try to go for because it's like half the price of like the organic stuff that's like advertised at a lot of co-ops here.
Mm-hmm. My go-to oolong is 2 cents a package. Cheap as shit.
Yeah.
And it tastes like it too. It's full of stems. Anyways. So
enough tea talk.
Yeah. So what's your vegan origin story?
My vegan origin story.
Yeah.
Well, I was vegetarian for a couple of years in high school. I went vegetarian when I was around 16. And that was just kind of from going to shows and, you know, seeing other punk kids like tabling literature about vegetarianism. And, you know, every once in a while there'd be like a person with a little TV and they'd be playing Meat is Murder during a band's performance. And there would be, you know, like a lot of the times there'd be like, you know, bands that came through my town that were either vegan or vegetarian, and they would talk about it on stage. And so, like most of my politics, like I was first exposed to them, you know, through punk music. So that was a big catalyst for me because it was kind of like, it was one of those things where it was just like I always cared for animals. I always felt a very strong affinity with animals. And, you know, growing up, animals had helped me a lot through a lot of tough times, particularly like the stray animals that lived in my neighborhood, the stray cats that would come by and visit. And so I always felt a really strong connection to them. And then, you know, when I started listening to bands like, you know, like Drop Dead and Disrupt and a lot of, you know, like crust bands that, you know, were vegan and sang about, you know, animal rights issues. That was kind of my first exposure to like veganism and my first exposure to animal testing and animals used for entertainment, things like that. And so after that, this is like during a time when, you know, as a young punk kid, I was homeless and I didn't have access to internet all the time. So it wasn't like I could just go home and like Google like animal rights stuff, you know? So it was just kind of like I was, you know, listening to these records and kind of being educated that way, and then going out and, you know, joining up with local AR groups and kind of learning more from them. And by the time I was 18, I ended up going fully vegan. It was during a time when I was working at a coffee shop. And I remember just standing there and I was just kind of sitting there spacing out. And I remember specifically thinking about a song by Drop Dead called Unjustified Murder. And I was just standing there and I was just like, you know, I think I'll go vegan today. And that was basically all it took. And I just never, you know, I just like stopped making my drinks with dairy, and I just never, you know, never went back and never thought about it again. It was that easy of a transition for me. And I mean, there was some bumpy roads the first couple of years of, you know, eating raw tofu and undercooked rice because I was, you know, still kind of trying to get a hold on cooking vegan for myself. But yeah, it was never really a difficult thing for me. When people tell me about how they struggle with it and stuff, it's just something I can't really comprehend or relate to, because for me it was just like, oh, I'm going to decide to do something, I'll just do it, you know. So yeah.
So was being homeless, was that circumstantial or is that by choice?
Kind of half and half. I mean, primarily the beginning of it, you know, I've been homeless since I was about 14, and that was more circumstantial given the household that I grew up in and the environment that I had tried to remove myself from. And it was also a choice as well, a conscious decision to leave, because I'm sure I could have continued living where I was living, but I also knew that it was doing a lot of damage to me and it was doing damage to people that I cared about. And it was just definitely not a place for me to grow and to, you know, learn how to be a decent person. And so when I stepped out of that household, it was when I finally started to surround myself with positive people that encouraged me to make positive changes in my life. And that was, you know, a big eye-opening experience, like going and staying with other people and kind of seeing how other people live and how other families interact and communicate. And I was just like, wow, you know, like I don't have to act the way that I was brought up to act, you know. And so that was kind of the first steps I took toward, you know, learning how to communicate better with people and, you know, making proactive decisions and things like that. So I guess, like, yeah, it's short answer is about half and half.
So was it like kind of couch surfing at 14, not just on the streets, or?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, there was a lot of friends that took me in, and I grew up in a town called Santa Barbara, California, and it hadn't always had like the wealthy reputation that it has now. Like back when I was growing up there, it was, just kind of like a small surf community. So I had a lot of friends that, had decent families, and, I'd bounce between places and stay with them and their families, and, their families were really kind, and they took me in and took care of me. And then there's also, there was some awkward times when I would be crashing outside and normally sleeping on rooftops or sleeping in movie theaters and stuff like that. And that stuff was fun. I mean, I look back on it with like a sense of nostalgia, but it was also, I mean, there were some rough nights, like when it would rain and stuff like that. But thankfully, Southern California has a pretty temperate climate, so it's not the most difficult place to be without a roof over your head. So,
do you have any like fucked up stories of that time frame of shit that happened?
I mean, yeah, like being out certain hours in the night, like you see some weird shit go down. And yeah, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, it's just like people always say, like, oh, people always think of Santa Barbara as this really like safe, pristine place, and in a lot of ways that it is. But then, if you're walking around in the street 3 o'clock in the morning downtown, or in like, some parts of town that are more known for for robberies and stuff like that, sometimes you see some weird shit. And like, there was a couple of awkward moments when, I had to run from people or hide or stuff like that, especially being a young kid. People always coming up to you and trying to get you in on whatever sketchy scam they got going on or something like that. And it's easy just to fall into the spell of other people, at that age. So it was a time of a lot of trial and error, I should say.
So were you going to school during this time?
Partially, yeah. I mean, I was in high school at the time, and by the time I was about 15 or 16, I was only going to a couple of classes, and they were mostly art classes. And, I, like most, kids from the punk scene, kind of realized that high school wasn't offering me a whole lot. And so I was going to art classes, and I had a journalism class that I really liked. And so I was going to those, and mostly just doing printmaking and screen printing and a lot of painting and illustration classes and things like that. And just kind of things that I felt were actually enriching my life, as opposed to, the other classes, which I could not relate to in the slightest. But then, by the time I was 16, I ended up testing out of high school and getting basically the equivalent of a GED. It's called a CHESP in California, but I tested out of high school, and at the time, my rationality was, school's just getting in the way of, skateboarding and eating burritos and playing in bands, and I just had to cut it loose, so.
So would you say that you were immersed in radical culture before, before you were 14, or was being homeless a part of what got you into radical culture?
Yeah, I mean, when I was about 12 and 13 is when I first started listening to punk music. But, at the time that was like some pretty watered down, like Fat Record style punk, so it wasn't necessarily very radical, and it wasn't until I was maybe about 14 that I started to piece together, like, oh, like I'm treated this way in the house that I grew up in, but, look how animals are treated, and look how, women are treated, look how, people of color are treated. And it was just kind of like an eye-opening thing for me when I like started sleeping outside and seeing how other people lived and seeing what other people had to do to survive. I was kind of like, well, like there's a reason that, people get put in this situation, and it's not just because they choose to be here, and there are a lot of other factors that lead people to get to this point in their life. And so, combining that with the music I was listening to at the time and the messages that these bands were putting out, it was just kind of piecing together like a different perspective of the world and how things generally run. And the more open I was about like the things that went on in my household, the things I experienced and witnessed, the more open other people were. And they're like, yeah, I experienced that too. And realized that it was like not just an isolated incident of something that, I lived through or that someone else lived through on their own. It's like more of a systemic thing that's going on. Like, and then there's a larger problem in our society. And so that was a really affirming thing to, be able to connect with other people on that level and hear their stories about stuff that they went through. And I was just like, wow, like I'm not alone in this. There's other people out there that experience it as well. Like, what can we do to remedy this,
So what would you say is like your most influential punk band growing up?
It's a difficult one. I mean, because there was bands that I listened to that weren't necessarily like influential to me on a personal level, but um, yeah, I guess I mentioned Drop Dead before. They were a big part, just because they were the style of music that I was really into at the time, like super crusty, super dark. But they also sang about things that I thought were really important, and I liked that because there were so many grindcore bands out there and thrash bands that were just totally apolitical, and just singing about partying and basically nothing really. And so Drop Dead was a big one. Disrupt was also a band that I got really into, and I was also I was straight edge too, so I listened to a lot of straight edge bands at the time that had a big influence on me as well. But yeah, I don't know. That's a tough one. I've never really thought about that. I guess it depends on influential on what aspect of my life, because I could say that as far as art goes and creativity goes, I think Page 99 had a huge influence on me, because they were this band that came out that played heavy music, but they were also like so creative and so innovative in the way that they did it. And they also had amazing artwork and really awesome live performances. And I had the privilege of seeing them when I was 16. And that was the first time I had seen a band play. And I was like, wow, like music really is like an art medium. You can really do whatever you want. Like things don't have to sound like bands that already exist. And, you can be innovative and do things and still tour, and people will still like what you do, and you can be expressive in your own individual way. And that was a big eye opener for me, because I was like, at that point, I was like, wow, like I want to do this. Like I want to play music that's like new and innovative and creative and something that hasn't been done before. So that had a big impact on me for sure.
Who would be like a modern influence for your music now?
Well, I have a few different musical projects I'm doing right now. I guess the main one, my acoustic project that I've been doing for like 6 or 7 years now, maybe a little bit longer. A lot of the older folk musicians like Woody Guthrie, Utah Phillips,
Mm-hmm.
this guy Blaze Foley, I've been listening to a lot recently. I'd say they're a big influence on me, just because I think about the context that their music exists in, and I see a lot of people kind of trying to copy that style and copy their, like kind of like almost their message, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because when Woody Guthrie was writing music, he was living through the Great Depression, and he was living out in the Dust Bowl, and so his music reflected that, and it was indicative of the time period that he lived in, and at the time it was like he was saying things that nobody else was saying, and he was talking about issues that weren't getting talked about, and that was one of the reasons I think why he got so popular and why his music was so well received, is because people felt like they could connect to it. But we live in a different era now, and so the music that I play, I also consider to be folk music, and this is an era that we live in where animal rights issues are coming to the forefront, and there's a lot of crackdowns from the FBI and from the federal government on animal rights activists, and there's a lot of shit coming down with the ATA, and activists being labeled as terrorists and things like that. And these are big issues in our lifetime. And so I try to sing about those issues, because I think, well, this is indicative of the time and the era that I live in. This is something that people are struggling with now, and this is the fight that's going on. So that's a big influence for me, is listening to these older folk musicians and listening to the things that they went through and the experiences that they had, and kind of trying to do that for a different generation, essentially.
Was there a moment for you that like you kind of switched from a hardcore and punk to like other styles of music? Because like for me, like, my late teens and early 20s, I was just a hardcore kid. Like if it wasn't hardcore, fuck off. And then I heard Tom Waits for the first time, and then I was blown away. Like, holy shit, there's actually good music out there that I've been like not limiting myself from.
Yeah. I mean, when I was a teenager, throughout the course of my life, I've always been a fan of music in general. Mm-hmm. I've always loved every end of the spectrum of music. But when I was a teenager, I was definitely too cool to listen to anything that wasn't like fast and loud and screaming and about straight edge or about punk issues or anything like that. And so there was a time when I was kind of living in denial and not admitting that I was like that I was into other bands, and then I secretly listened to other bands that weren't punk bands. But as I got a little bit older, and like I said, after I saw a lot of bands that were really creative in their message, and I realized like, oh, I don't have to just play one certain style of music and still carry a certain message. And so when I started playing acoustic music, I was like, these are things that I want to talk about and I want to express, but there aren't, a lot of vegan people in my town to start a band with. And also, I felt that the message was easier to get across for me to write an acoustic song about it because, the music, I thought that, the message could be clearer, and it also could be kind of directed at a different demographic, people that wouldn't normally like punk music, because there's a lot of animal rights people that didn't grow up in the punk scene, and I constantly forget that because I'm just like, wait, you went vegan and you never heard like this band or that band, but yeah, it's so I decided writing acoustic music might be a good angle and a good way to reach some people that would normally be exposed to those kinds of things, and I've had some relative success in getting that message to people that wouldn't normally hear about it. And then sometimes, typical vegan bands, I get the "he's pretty preachy" response every once in a while too.
So how do you transcend into your activism from your music? I know that your music talks a lot about activist related stuff, but on like a personal level, did the activism start before the music or after the music, I guess?
Before I started playing acoustic music solo, I started going to like some PETA demos that were being organized in my hometown, and I was maybe 17, 18 at the time. And, we would go, and we didn't really have a whole lot in our town to protest against, but we did have a rodeo every year. And so we'd go and protest the rodeo, and that's kind of how I met other folks. And that was my first kind of foray into like, protests and direct action and things like that. And then I started living at this squat with a couple other punk guys. Neither of them were vegan, and neither of them were into animal rights, but it was kind of a house that we all bonded over skateboarding with. Like, we had a big skate ramp in our backyard, and we also hosted Food Not Bombs at the house. And so a lot of folks were coming through town or coming over to help out cook, and that's how I met like some of the other vegan folks from my hometown that I normally had never come across before, because they went to different high schools or they hung out in different groups, and they kind of exposed me to like a different side of like our community, and they started taking me to like vegan potlucks, and vegan potlucks at the time were like maybe like 10 people would show up, and that was like all the vegan people in town were there. And so that's how I met other people, and it kind of just grew from there. And every time that I never tried to like step out of activism, but I never like it's not like I ever, I don't know, like, I guess like just there's always a reason to stay in it, like it was like either I was playing a show and then I got invited to play a benefit show, or I was just like on tour or something, and someone would be like, oh, hey, let's go do a demo or something like that. And so at a young age, like I was just started consistently hearing more and more about different things that were going on, and learning more and more about how these industries work and what can be done about it. And, it just kind of grew from there. It just kind of it just built upon itself, basically. And I got more and more involved as time passed. And, by the time I was 20 years old, I was, consistently booking tours that included animal rights demos in them, and always like writing vegan outreach and asking them for a big box of, pamphlets to hand out at every show and things like that. And so at that point I was like full on, like, this is animal rights and you should learn about it and stuff like that. So it took me a little while to like get to that place, a couple of years, but yeah, like I said, it was a build up over a period of time.
What's been the biggest change you've seen in activism since you've been involved?
I guess social media has had a big impact on activism, because when I was first getting involved about 10 years ago, social media was a thing, but it wasn't really like an activist thing at that point, at least from my perspective. I mean, there was things like LiveJournal at the time and things like that, but like I don't remember a whole lot of like campaigning being done like solely through the internet like it's done now. And now, it's like you see a lot of like Twitter storms or, like call-ins and things like that on Facebook, and like, Kickstarter campaigns to launch other campaigns, things like that. And, that's great. Like, that's a really awesome thing. But I think it's also taken its toll on like actual like protests and things like that. And you go to protests now, and it seems like the numbers are dwindling, and there's not a lot of people that come out to things. And I think that also has to do a lot with, the new laws that are being passed, and people being labeled as terrorists, people getting arrested for no reason and being charged on bogus charges. And I mean, that all like contributes to it. But I think that like, when I read about different eras in the animal rights movement, when there's like, 15, 20 years ago, there'd be a protest happening in Seattle against the Seattle Fur Exchange, or there'd be a protest happening in Portland against Oregon Health and Sciences University. There'd be like 1,000 people at the protests, and things would get rowdy, stuff would get broken, stuff like that. But now it's like, you organize a protest in Portland against Oregon Health and Sciences University, you're lucky to get 20 people, to it. So it's difficult to say like what has the most effect on that, but I think social media is something that does affect it a little bit. And I think also, like I said before, the new laws that have been passed over the past decade.
So it just reminded me of like back then when, you could organize protests and have hundreds of people show up, and now it's just hard to get anyone to show up. Yeah.
Oh. I wonder.
I think it leads to like, is armchair activism really doing what it should be doing?
Yeah, and that's the thing is like I've seen, some successes with call-ins. I've seen some successes with like email blasts and petitions and things like that. And I don't want to discount those things because I think they have their place and I think they're really good. But there's also these people get involved in the animal rights movement that are, relatively new and don't really have the experience of like being on the ground and like putting actual work into a campaign, putting actual work into, like building coalitions and socializing with people and getting out there and meeting other folks and seeing how other people do things. And I think that's a really important aspect that's missing from, like internet activism. You don't travel places, you don't meet new people, you don't see like, what works in this town that wouldn't work in my town and vice versa, because every situation's different, every campaign is different, and what may work in some situation doesn't work in the other. And so I think a lot of people don't really get to experience that aspect of it because they're, at home on the computer and relatively isolated from the outside world for the most part. And they're not building connections the way that you would do if you, met someone face to face and shook their hand or hugged them or like had a real conversation with them. And that's something that I think is just missing in our society as a whole, but also I think it's something that's affecting the animal rights community is the fact that people just don't meet face to face anymore and get to know each other that way. So,
I was gonna say, and I don't want to shit on online activism because hell, that's kind of what we're doing here.
Yeah,
but it really, I think any way that people can get involved is great. But there is nothing like actually watching a campaign and building it and being on the ground, meeting new people and traveling and, going through those struggles together.
Yeah. And I think it builds a sense of camaraderie as well. And there's, there's a lot of new laws coming down that are pretty scary, and like I'll admit, like it's scary, the idea of, going to jail for no reason, being able to terrorist things like that. People are afraid of that. And it's a lot easier to trust folks and to get to know folks if you actually meet them face to face, and it gives you a sense of security knowing that, there are other people out there like physically fighting this fight, and not just a random person, posting on Facebook or something like that you've never met and you've never had a conversation with. So I think it just like the bond that it creates as well is a really important one for me because it reminds me like, oh, I'm not in this like on my own and fighting this fight, like, which is like a small group of friends that I have here in town. It's like a pretty big widespread thing, it's a worldwide movement.
And plus if you're sitting at home just writing petitions, you never get the chance to see a 60-year-old grandma de-arrest people in HLS protest, which is pretty fucking amazing.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
yeah, totally. I mean, there's a lot of, and the other thing about protests too that I like, I mean, sometimes they're just fun. Like sometimes funny things happen. Sometimes like really amazing things like that happen. It's just, yeah, you miss out on seeing a lot of cool shit if you don't go out to protest. So
yeah, you really do. I kind of miss it in some aspects, some of the big protests. At the same time, I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's an issue here. Definitely getting jaded and bitter about things. Is there any way that have you ever like come into that? And is there any way that you found yourself
like battling being jaded and
how do you overcome that?
Yeah.
Well, fuck. I mean, I'm kind of going through that. Like right now, I've just been, I've been going at it like pretty hard for the past 6 years, and
Mhm.
I never really took a break from organizing or going out to things. And every time I try to get myself like away from, you know, organizing for a little while, just to kind of like recenter myself and get my head back in a good place so I can come back at it strong again. It's like I said, something always just kind of drags me back in. It's always like, oh, like there's some shit going on over it, like, you know, BlackRock, a new investor at HLS, or there's this other company that's invested in Huntington Life Sciences that, you know, just opened up, or, you know, there's always something that was going on. And so I'd always find it easy just to kind of step back into it. And now it's like, you know, after touring for so many years and traveling so much, and, you know, it just like, it finally was like really taking its toll on me. And I found it came to a point where I just like kind of just stopped giving a shit about a lot of things. I was just like, I just don't want to do anything anymore. Like, I don't want to go out. I don't want to talk about this or that. I don't want to watch videos of, you know, animals being hurt anymore. And it was just like coming to a point where I was just like so burnt out that, you know, I just like it, there was no other option but just to take some time and like focus on some creative projects and kind of step away from it for a little while. And I think that's something that, you know, I think people should keep in mind when they're organizing. It's like important to take some time for yourself every once in a while. And you know, I hate to use I don't really want to use the term self-care, but like, you know, just like going out and doing things that you enjoy, things that kind of take your mind off of things for a little while. And, you know, really ultimately, like, if you start to get burnt out and you start to, you know, lose your interest in organizing, and you kind of like lose your passion for it, I mean, really the only people that suffer are the animals. So it's important to take a step away for brief periods of time, collect yourself, get your head in a good space, and come back, because then oftentimes you can come back even stronger. And that was just something I wasn't doing the past few years, and it was good to kind of step away and start working on music projects that were political in a sense, but also more about creativity and expression and things like that. And so I've been doing a few of those, and I just did a big long bike tour, which was the first bike tour I ever did. I rode down the Oregon coast, and I've been working on a zine about it for actually Profane Existence approached me about releasing it on their website, and so I was pretty excited about that. And yeah, it's just nice to kind of take a break for a little bit. And you know, I think eventually when I do come back to organizing things again, that I'll be in a better headspace and I'll be better prepared. And yeah, you know, and sorry, I'm kind of running on a little bit here, but I also wanted to bring up the fact that, you know, a lot of people experience a lot of really traumatic things in the animal rights movement, and they don't take a moment to kind of step away and get the help that they need. And that was something that happened to me when I came back from the tsunami in Japan. When I came back, I was pretty messed up. You know, I was in a bad headspace, but I like never really took the time to try out different forms of therapy and you know, and to work through my PTSD. And so when I finally did, it was just like, wow, I should have done this like 2 years ago, you know, like when I first got out. Because literally the day we flew back from Japan, I landed in Seattle. The first thing I did within hours of landing back in the US after escaping from Japan, we went straight to the Seattle Fur Exchange and went to a protest. So I basically just jumped right back into it, and I never really took a break. And that was definitely something that weighed heavy on me for a while too. So it's good to take a little break from that and kind of recollect myself.
You know, at the height of me organizing, I never understood that, and I would always criticize people for, you know, trying to take the time and trying to focus on themselves. And now that I'm older, it's just like, yeah, it is way more fucking important than people realize.
Yeah.
And I was just going to say, and accepting that people, you know, can have issues like PTSD, I think that's something that needs to be addressed, because it's definitely not talked about as much as it should be in radical circles.
No, it seems like it's only been starting to be addressed in the last couple of years, where before it was like, oh, you just got out of jail. Why aren't you, you know, as hardcore as you used to be? Why aren't you doing all this shit? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was kind of the reason why when I get back from Japan, I just jumped right back into organizing, because I was just like, I don't want to be one of those people that's like, oh, I experienced some shit and it spooked me, you know, or it shook me, and I just didn't, you know, and then I'll drop out or something. I was just like, no, I need to prove like that I'm still committed and I'm still down and all this stuff. And so I just jumped right back into it. And then it wasn't like until a couple years later, I was just like, shit, that was the wrong call. I should have taken some time to work on this stuff, because it's, you know, it was just something that built up because I tried to bury it just by being busy all the time, and that ultimately just made things worse, because then it would just explode all at once later on. And yeah, and that was something too. Like, it was a really rude awakening for me, because I was just like, man, people like really don't understand mental health stuff. Like, I never really understood mental health stuff. Like, this is what it's like to go through shit like this, and this is like a scary and difficult thing to deal with. And I realized then, it's like, unfortunately, a lot of activist circles, they're not very well equipped in dealing with people that have experienced the stuff that some people experience, and that's sometimes people need to go and get professional help. And like, it's, that was something that I had to do. And, I was like falling back on this old, all the talk, like in the anarchist communities that I grew up in, of like, oh, we always take care of each other, we don't need them, like mental health stuff, we can handle that shit, and it's just like, I still identify as an anarchist, but that was one thing that I was just kind of like, wow. I mean, I did a lot of that talk too, and I realized now, like, if I was ever like asked to provide the support and help that someone like me needed in a situation like this, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Like, I wouldn't have understood. I would have been freaked out. I would have been scared, and that's basically what happened to me. People were just freaked out by it. They didn't understand it. They didn't know what to do, and so it was just kind of like, wow, we need to like clean up our talk and get our shit together a little bit more in regards to stuff like this, because it's important. This is something that affects a lot of people.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people will choose to distance themselves from someone, thinking that that'll help the situation, or that they're just scared to address the situation, so they don't want to be involved. And some people might need that distance. Some people might need, some support. Yeah. So I mean, it's definitely something that is unique to each individual, and so it's hard to address as a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what led to you being in Japan during the tsunami?
So I was there. I'm really bad with years. I want to say it was 2011, but it could have been 2010. I had something about, like, I have a really good memory, except for when it comes to dates. I don't know what that is, but it's just like, it's like, what year did you leave high school? And I'm just like, shit, I don't know, like 2003. But yeah, anyway, we were there with the Sea Shepherd Cove Guardian campaign. And originally what was going to happen was myself and two other people I was organizing with at the time were going to meet up with the other activists that are on the ground in Taiji that were taking photographs of the dolphins being slaughtered in the cove. That, if anyone out there has seen the documentary The Cove, that's exactly the same. That's the same town that I'm referring to. But like a month before we got there, there was like an email that was sent out saying that the hunt in the cove was cut short by a couple of months, like abruptly. And so they didn't finish out the year. They didn't like the fishermen never really explained why, but they just cut the season short and they stopped hunting. So we got an email saying basically, like, if you want to still go out there, there's another town in northern Japan that needs some attention. And it's actually the largest cetacean slaughter in the world. It's just one that doesn't get talked about because it's not really like essentially like a linchpin in the industry, because Taiji, not only do they kill the dolphins, but they also sell them for entertainment purposes. And so that was why I got so much attention, because this was like a really pivotal point in like the industry, like was going after the specific cove. This other place, the whales and dolphins are only killed for their meat. And so we decided that, yeah, this sounds like a good thing. Like, we'll go out there, we'll take some photographs, we'll take some notes, we'll figure out how this whole thing works, because the idea was to figure out, where these whales were going, how many were being taken out of the ocean, how many boats there were that were doing it, like basically just figure out anything that we could and just basically make like a document of all the information we could find. And so we flew into Osaka and rented a car, and we drove that up basically across the entire country. It took us like two or 3 days to get up there and settled in this town called Otsuchi. And we couldn't find a hotel anywhere. And so we eventually got a hotel a little bit further inland. And I think part of the reason why we couldn't find a hotel, even though we weren't wearing our Sea Shepherd gear, people knew we were Sea Shepherd. And so they weren't wanting to rent to us or lend a room to us. And so we eventually found a hotel that just either didn't care or didn't know. And it was a couple of miles inland, I'd say like 30 miles inland. And we were out in Otsuchi the first day, and we were taking photographs of all the hunter boats, and we were in the harbor waiting for all the hunter boats to come back. A couple of them went out for the day, and one of them came back, and they just had like a bunch of shrimp in their boat. and then there was still one missing. I think there was 13 of them originally, and the 13th one was still missing, and so we're waiting for it to come back. And then that's when the 9.0 earthquake hit, is when we were in the harbor. And yeah, and so we were just like, we basically just kind of stood there shocked. I mean, I grew up in California, so we had a lot of earthquakes, and this was just like something I never experienced. It lasted like what seemed like a couple of minutes. Like, it was just, the ground was just consistently shaking. Our cars were like kind of teetering on the edge of the dock, almost looking like they were going to fall off. And eventually, it stopped. And then this guy, Scott West, who's the campaign coordinator at the time, he was like, we need to get out of here. There might be a wave coming, And so we all hopped in the cars and we drove across town. It was like straight out of a movie. It was just like this total like apocalyptic, just like landscape. People, like, cars were flying past, people were running down the street screaming. There was burst water mains all over the place. There was roofs that were partially collapsed. And so we drove up to this hill, which is the only hill in the area we knew of. And actually, it was the only reason we survived, is because we drove to this one specific hill, because it created this break in the bay that pushed the current away in two different directions. And so the water rose up like, it seemed like over 100 feet in some areas. It was like pushed up into these valleys up in the bay and destroyed like basically every house that it, like in the bay, because these houses are built in these little valleys. So it would create this funnel effect. And the only reason we got up there and escaped is because like we had gotten lost there the night before, and went to that hill. And it was a very, lucky break for us, because the water rose up and almost touched the rim of the cliff that we were on, but just barely skirted down. It didn't get us. And yeah, it was gnarly. I mean, we basically stood up there on the hill and watched the entire city disappear, and we didn't know what was going on, like what happened. And I mean, this is a really long story, so I'm going to try to cut it short, because like by the time I usually get done telling it, it takes like 2 hours. But essentially, we slept in the car that night because the sun was going down. The next morning, we walked across a couple of ruined cities. And when I mean ruin, it's like, it was just flat. Like, there was like fucking nothing there. There was a couple of buildings standing that were, more structurally sound than the other ones, but that was basically it. There was, it was a horrific landscape. There was bodies like hanging in trees. There was bodies under rubble. There was people screaming for help. There was massive fires and explosions, and there was like underground gas tanks that were exploding all around us. And it was like, it was like straight, like I said, straight out of a movie. And eventually we walked across a couple of cities and got to a road that was working, hitchhiked back to our hotel. Our hotel was still intact. And we grabbed our stuff, and then we actually planned on staying in Japan the next 2 weeks and going down to Taiji and seeing how things were down there. But then when the power came on the next day, and we finally got to call people and let them know, because we were technically missing for 2 days, which is a weird thing to say, that I was missing, because I knew where I was the whole time. So it's not like telling somebody else where I was like, kind of an odd thing. I was like, oh wait, people might think that we're dead, which a lot of people did. And eventually the TV came back on, and the only thing that the channels were broadcasting was essentially talking about the Fukushima reactor melting down, and we were within the fallout zone. And so we were just like, we need to get out of here as quick as possible, because they were saying like, everyone stay calm, nothing bad's going to happen, like some radiation got out and floating through the air, but everything's fine. And we were just like, yeah, we don't trust this, we need to leave. And so we ended up hiring a couple of taxis to drive us across the other side of the country. Got some flights to South Korea, and then from South Korea flew back to Washington. And yeah, I mean, it was a pretty gnarly experience. And at the time when I was actually like living it, it was just like, oh, this is just some shit that happened. Like, I got to deal with it, because I've been in a lot of tight spots in my life, and I was just like, all right, like, this is a problem to be solved. We just got to get to our hotel, and then we got to get home, and then, et cetera, et cetera. It was just like basically a series of things that we needed to do. And it wasn't until I had gotten home that I was just like, things just started hitting me, and I was like, oh shit, like, that was some stuff that we saw, and that was when the problems really started to set in. So that was a pretty difficult period of time.
It's amazing how we can compartmentalize things to get through a situation, but then once you're through it, how it can start decompressing and then really start hitting you the reality of what you've been through.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, is like, you think it's gone and you think you're fine, and you think like, nah, I'm fucking tough, like, whatever, I can deal with that shit, and you think like that stuff might affect some people, but like, I've had a hard life, and I know how to handle shit like this, and it's not until you realize like, oh no, like that part was just locked away in a weird part of my brain, and now it's just kind of popping out and affecting how I'm acting and how I'm behaving, and it's affecting other aspects of my life. And it's just something that it's like, when people start to like reach that point, like when people, like some would say, like start to lose your mind, it's like you don't realize that it's happening when it's happening. It wasn't until like I stepped away from it, I was just like, whoa, like I was really kind of going off the deep end there for a little bit. Like, PTSD was really affecting like big portions of my life. Like I couldn't work, I couldn't go out places, I couldn't hang out with people, and it was just something that you don't realize it's happening. Other people can see it, but you can't see it. And it's not until you get some distance from it that you're just like, whoa, that was a pretty dark time. Like that was an experience. But anyway.
Yeah. So switching it a little bit,
yeah.
What kind of advice would you give to like a new activist that's just coming into the movement?
I'd say take the time to learn tactics and strategies from a lot of different people. Don't come in thinking like, oh, the only way to help animals is to, like burn down a building, or the only way to help animals is to sign petitions, or the only way to help animals, like try to get in there and meet a lot of different people and find what works for you, find what is comfortable for you, find what you think your skills, what plays best to your existing talents, and for me that was art. Like for me that was music and artistic expression. And so that was like, oh, this is a way that I can help animals, because this is like, I already play music and this is something I've been doing for a long time, and this is just like, this is one aspect of my activism. And so I think that it's good to just kind of find your groove and find what you're comfortable with and find what your talents are, because I think the animal rights movement is something that needs a chorus of different voices. It doesn't necessarily need one more than the other. And I think that having a lot of, diverse perspectives and diverse experiences in the movement is a really important thing. And so I think that like learning from a lot of different activists and hearing about their experiences and seeing how that relates and applies to your own life is a really important thing. So, don't go in like starting battles with other groups and, calling other people out and saying that they're not being effective enough and stuff like that. I think like take some time, learn some shit, read some books, like really like take a look at the history of the animal rights movement, think about where it's been, think about where it could possibly go, and see how you can contribute to that.
I wish I would have gotten that advice early on. I remember we organized our very first ADL Salt Lake in 99, and the flyer we made said something to the effect of, protesting isn't enough. If you think going to a protest is enough, fuck you.
Yeah.
It wasn't a great way to build a community.
Yeah. When I first got involved too, I kind of wish someone had taken me aside and said something along those lines. And I mean, because I was like, I was basically in the same boat. Like I had a basically mentality. It's like, if you're not vegan, then fuck you. That was kind of like my mentality when I first went vegan. And I wish I could have like gone back in time and like told myself like, yo, like you need to cool it. This shit's not cool. It's not making you look like it's not helping anybody. It's not gonna help animals or anything like that, and I don't know, like the way that I think about it is like I try to live my life and set the examples that a past me would relate to, and a past me would be like, oh, that's some decent advice, that's some reasonable things that I can do, to kind of change my behavior and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know, I play a lot of shows and I'm kind of out in front of people a lot. And I think it's important to kind of be consistent and be like, look, like, I understand the anger about like being like, fuck y'all that aren't vegan or whatever. And fuck anyone that's not involved in animal rights or doesn't care about animals. Like I understand that anger, because like I came from a place like that too, but you gotta learn how to get along with people, man. Like this is a big world, a lot of people, a lot of different experiences. Like you gotta learn how to approach this in a way that's like people can relate to it and understand where you're coming from, and not just like have a reaction to the way that you're saying it, because I want people to be offended by what I say, but I want them to be offended because what's going on and like what's happening to animals, like what happens to animals behind closed doors is offensive. What happens in these industries is despicable, but I don't want them to be offended by the way that I, approach things and the way that I phrase things. I want people to be offended for all the right reasons, and I don't want anyone to feel like alienated or marginalized because of the language that I use or because of the way that I approach a campaign or or a talk or anything like that.
Have you ever been criticized for your music for the language that you use?
Yeah, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and there's songs that I wrote when I was like a teenager, and I guess like the one thing specifically that comes to mind is the first time I toured Europe. It was like 3 or 4 years ago, and I had this song about Huntington Life Sciences, and I wrote the song. I think I was 19 when I wrote the song, and it was like during a time when PETA was like doing that whole like Holocaust on your plate campaign, and I remember likening HLS to the Third Reich in the song, and I played this without even thinking about it, because I just played this song so many times. No one had ever said anything about me to me about it, and it was just kind of one of those things where I had just been doing it for so long that I never really thought about the lyrics or thought about changing them. And I played the song in Luxembourg, and these Antifa guys that were there got really upset, and they were like, one guy in particular, he was pretty drunk at the time, but he got really upset, and it almost like seemed like I was going to get in a big fight at first, and I was just like had to clarify, like, I'm anti-fascist, I'm anti-Nazi, like that's not the point I was trying to make. But everybody was upset, like, by the way that I had phrased this song. And I was like, we had a really long conversation about it in the middle of the show. And in a lot of ways, it was a fucking bummer, because like getting publicly being humiliated like that is obviously the huge bummer. But also I was just like, no, I understand, like, you've lost family members during the Holocaust. Like, I haven't lost family members. Like, and so it was after that I was like, man, I need to be a lot more sensitive about the way that I phrase things, and like not necessarily like change like every aspect of my life, and like constantly like, to use a very non-vegan term, like walk on eggshells with people, but like to be respectful of people and their experiences, to be respectful of their past and like the things that their families have gone through. And I was like, I got to a point where I was just like, likening vivisection to the Holocaust, like, even though logically there are a couple of things that are similar in that sense, it's just like insensitive to bring it up and to phrase it in this way, because there are people out there that have suffered. There's still people alive that have suffered through that. And I was just like, I just don't want to hurt anybody for the wrong reasons. Like, I don't want to bring up that aspect of someone's life like that. That's a horrible experience that they went through. They lost people that they loved, and I was just, after that point, I was like, I started like taking a look at my past songs and the lyrics that I had written, and I was just like, yeah, I need to change some shit here. But, unfortunately, those songs were recorded when I was a teenager, so it's not like I can just go back and erase them or rewrite them. So now I can only provide context and kind of explain, like, I'm a bit of a different person than when I wrote that song, and I wouldn't phrase it the same way now, So, and when I play them live, I change the lyrics a little bit just to kind of evolve with my understanding of the world as time went on. So
that reminds me of Ian MacKaye always having to explain guilty of being white.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard like every interview I've ever heard with him, it gets brought up.
Yeah, that's one of those things too. It's like, thankfully, like, Ian's pretty articulate about it now, and he's just like, yeah, I wouldn't, it was a stupid thing to do, and I wouldn't write that song again, and et cetera, et cetera. But it's also like, as sketchy. I mean, obviously it's a sketchy song, but the thing about it is, like, I also empathize with him, because I'm just like, I wrote some songs when I was a teenager that, if they had as much popularity or success as Minor Threat had, like, I'd be mortified, and like, basically, I'd have to go through the rest of my life explaining it too, and like being like, I was 17 when I wrote that song, but yeah, I mean, like, people forget, like, Ian wrote that song, he was like 18 years old, 17 years old, and I mean, we were all different people when we were teenagers. We said some shit, and like, I'm not always proud of everything I had done and done it during my lifetime, and I'm thankful that it wasn't documented as thoroughly as some bands out there have documented their stuff. But yeah.
I've heard Conor Oberst talk about the same thing about his whole musical career being documented so heavily, how he absolutely hates it now.
Yeah, because they had that was it like Commander Keen or something, or Commander, I forget his solo stuff when he was like 13, and all those recordings came out, and yeah, there was some sketchy shit in there, but he's a 13-year-old kid writing these songs, and
yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's like, and I think about that too with people that have like social media accounts now that, like post like these really inflammatory things all the time, or these really like dramatic statements and stuff like that. And I'm just like, man, stuff that goes on the internet, it's not going to go away. Like you're going to be like 10 years from now, you're going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote that. Like, what was I thinking? And now it's basically emblazoned on the internet forever. And I'm going to have to constantly like see it and hear about it. But yeah.
So, switch it up a little bit again. You were saying that, there's a lot of like infighting here locally in Salt Lake, and I've heard like Portland's pretty similar. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what's a good way to stop that?
I'd say probably the easiest and most basic thing people can do is just have conversations, like meet up face to face and have like, if you need a mediator to be there to mediate a conflict, bring someone along that has that kind of training and knows what they're doing. And like, I'd say just try to talk it out. I mean, oftentimes things that blow up here blow up over like a personal disagreement or a personal fight, and it all of a sudden becomes like a community issue, and people take hard stances and lines get drawn and things like that. And I mean, it's difficult just knowing that like, these fights that happen between people that would normally get along and would normally be friends, are avoidable. And, I think that people just need to keep in mind, like, to be respectful, even if you're angry with someone, like, try to have a respectful conversation with them, try to have them, like, a direct conversation with them, be real with them, but also, like, be respectful of where they're at, their emotional needs, and, essentially what they're asking, like, what they need from you when you're communicating. And I think that's one of the biggest things that, plagues a lot of activist communities. People don't communicate directly about things, and then things blow up, and a lot of passive aggressive stuff happens. And Portland already has a reputation for being a passive aggressive place, and so that doesn't help much. And yeah, it's just it's hard. I mean, it's hard. It's like, it's hard to say like what can prevent it. But for me, I know that like there's a lot of issues like in conflict that I've had with people that could have been resolved by a simple conversation. It could have been like a conversation was just like, oh, you did this that offended me, or you said this that offended me, and I could be like, okay, cool, yeah, like, yeah, I understand how that offended you, and it was like, I'm sorry, and I won't do it. Like, and that, like, sometimes that's all it takes. And obviously, there's a lot more problems out there that are a lot more complex than that. But I think that like people just generally just don't talk shit out. They just don't talk to each other, and I think that ends up like letting things stew and fester, and then it all blows up later. And a lot of fights that happen between a group of people, or like one group versus another group, all of a sudden become like a citywide thing. And people are like boycotting certain businesses or boycotting like different like organizations and things like that, and it's just like it becomes like a huge deal over something that started so small and then built on that. And yeah, so it's something that a lot of the time I think is avoidable. But there are obviously a lot more complex situations out there that need to be dealt with differently. But I think a lot of the time, a lot of the fighting that does most of the damage is just done over something that could be resolved with a simple, you did this, I'm sorry, okay, I accept your apology, let's move on.
What I think gets missed by a lot of people is how hypercritical activists are, because we are constantly looking at what we feel is like the worst parts of society. And so when someone in your community that you think should be perfect, you find out isn't, just like you're not. People I think overreact way too much to just a lot of stupid human mistakes that people make.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, people fuck up, like,
yeah,
and people, and like we talked about before, people have lived through some shit that affects the way that they behave and affects their perception on the world. And a lot of people don't keep that in mind when they like address them about certain things. And, it's just something that it's a really difficult thing, because it's kind of like, I use this analogy every once in a while, but it's like, when I was a kid growing up, we would go to punk shows, and, there was like, Nazi boneheads that would show up to shows, and we'd constantly have to fight them. And then after we'd push the Nazis out, there'd be, drunk frat guys showing up trying to start fights, and we'd have to fight them. And then once everybody was gone, there was no one else to fight. And so everybody just kind of started fighting each other, because that was what the way that everybody was used to dealing with conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the same thing happens in activist circles where people are just like, oh, like, how do we deal with this organization or this, this company that tests on animals, or how do we deal with this, this farm that was like recently exposed by an undercover investigation? It's like, oh, we blast them publicly all over the internet. We encourage people to attack that person, or we encourage people to boycott this place, or we encourage people to write them nasty letters and stuff like that. And oftentimes, like, yeah, people kind of forget, like, this isn't the only way to deal with conflict. It's a tactic that we typically use and reserve for people that abuse animals in industries that profit off the exploitation of other living beings, but then that often gets turned on their own friends or their own people from their own community, and it becomes basically like an all-out war against somebody. And it's just kind of like sometimes there's just like, and I've done it myself. There's just like sometimes there's just no on and off switch for that kind of thing. It's like it's a difficult thing to keep in mind when you get into an argument with somebody. It's just like, oh wait, like this isn't like a horrible, grotesque, monstrous industry that profits off of the deaths of animals, and this is like another person just like me that fucked up and that did something wrong that needs to be fixed, but like they deserve a chance to work through their shit because they care about the things that I care about, and it's just people are pretty quick and pretty ready to burn bridges and to create big divisions and stuff like that. And that's kind of a scary thing right now. It's just that people are so ready to go to war over sometimes really small personal disputes. And I don't know, it's a really difficult thing to navigate because you want to be sensitive to everybody, but oftentimes we talked about being jaded, and sometimes you just get so jaded you're just like, I wash my hands of this. I don't want to be part of this conflict, and I don't want to have to take sides, and et cetera, et cetera. So it can be a very trying experience, and all the while during that period of time when you're dealing with stuff like that, you're not doing animal rights work, and you're not organizing fundraisers for political prisoners, and you're not like meeting with people or anything like that. So
is it bad that when you said all out war, I've just had it stuck in my head now?
Is that the Earth Crisis song?
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, it's funny because I think I'm like one of the few vegan and straight edge people that's like ever lived that never really got into Earth Crisis. Like, so I actually had no idea I just referenced any of their music right there. But
they were very influential to me early on. I was vegan when I started listening to them. But like, as far as like really influential bands early on, them and Strife were pretty influential to me early, like junior high school time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was into Strife when I was in like my freshman year of high school. I got really into them. They were like one of the first straight edge bands I ever listened to.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I got introduced to veganism through punk music, and I was straight edge just because I've been sober since I was since birth, basically. Like, I grew up, like in a sketchy household, and I was just like, wow, I saw some extremes of drug addiction and some extremes of alcoholism, and it was always a very easy decision for me not to get involved in that. And so when I was 14 and I started meeting other kids that were sober, I realized straight edge was a thing, and that other people identified that way. And so that's kind of how I transitioned into it. And people always assume like, oh, you must be like the biggest Earth Crisis fan, And I'm just like, no, actually, like, I'm not a really big fan of that style of music, but like, and it's funny because I got people always ask me like, why does everyone call you Mike XVX? Is that your legal name? And I'm like, no, obviously it's not my legal name. The thing is like, when I was a teenager in my hometown, there were so many different Mikes that were part of the scene. There was like, a friend of mine he did Food Not Bombs, and so everyone called him Food Not Mike. And, and it was just like an easy way to identify everybody, just to give them like little nicknames. And everybody started calling me Mike XVX because I was the only Mike in town that was vegan and straight edge. And I think at the time I was the only person in town that was too. And so the name just kind of stuck, and I was just like, everybody kind of forgot that I had a legal last name and started calling me that. And at the time, it wasn't like a conscious decision. It was just something that just people called me that. And so it just stuck. And then now that like 10 years later, it's just like people still call me that. And people are just like, oh, it's stupid. Like, can't believe you gave yourself such a dorky name. And I'm like, it wasn't my decision, man. It was just like, it was something that happened. And in the long run, it's like, I realize now it's beneficial that like a lot of folks don't know your last name because, it's kept me out of trouble more than once. And, it makes crossing over international borders a little bit easier because they're just like, oh, like I never thought to Google your name, Mike XVX, and look up that you're an animal rights activist, et cetera, and stuff like that. And so Obviously there's benefits to, having a nickname, but it's also kind of a burden in the same sense, because I'm just like so sick of like explaining to people like what happened and why I'm called that. And no, I'm not from the Tumblr era where everyone has XVX at the end of their name. Like, this is just something people call me. So,
Do you ever feel constrained by the nickname?
Yeah, I mean, not in the sense of people being like, oh, I feel like I don't use that label vegan because like I don't like to feel, like I'm restricting myself, stuff like I don't, not in that sense, but like, yeah, I mean, I can't, like every time I play music, like I have a noise project that I've been doing for a little while now called Breathe Glass, and it's like every time I go play a show in another town, it's just like, oh, this is a Breathe Glass show, like I'm going and playing this noise show with a bunch of other noise bands, and then someone's just like post on Facebook like, hey, my buddy Mike XVX is playing at this venue, and doesn't even mention like that I play as Breathe Glass for the show, and it's just like I don't know if people are showing up because they expect acoustic music and then they just get blasted by this like sonic horrible screeching that I make, and it's kind of awkward. And it's restrictive in that way, because it's just like, yeah, every time I do another like solo music project, people are just like, new solo project by Mike XVX, and it's just like, it's really nothing like my acoustic music, so yeah. But I mean, there's not really much to complain about in that sense, but that part is a little bit weird, because I feel like I'm destined to be the acoustic guy for the rest of my life. If I do anything else, they're just like, oh yeah, that's that acoustic guy, and he just happens to play punk music now or something.
So how can people follow you and see your work?
I have a Bandcamp for my various music projects, but my main one is just mikexvx.bandcamp.com, and I actually have a new album that I released earlier this year, which I was going to talk about, and then we ended up just talking about tea and whatever else, which is totally fine. I mean, I don't care. Like, I love tea, so it's just, that's a great topic of conversation for me. But yeah, I released a new album earlier this year, and it's weird. It was a weird experience because the only reason I wrote this album and worked on it, I was really busy with a lot of other projects at the time, but I was approached by a record label. And this is the first time like a legit, like full on, like sign a contract record label asked me to release an album. And so I know this is very unpunk, and I'm probably going to get some hate mail being like, you're not a fucking anarchist. And like, but I signed this contract that was basically like, it was nothing scary. It was not signing my rights over to these people. It was just like basically giving them permission to release my music for me. And they were going to put my album out, and they were stoked on it. I was stoked on it. They promoted a lot of like socially conscious music, and they put out some like big bands. And right before my album was supposed to be released, like a month before it was like totally finished and it was getting mastered, they wrote me an email like, oh yeah, hey, sorry, we ran out of money and we're shutting down. And so we can release your album, but like we can't promote it at all. And I was just like, oh, great. And so they were like, if you want to back out of the contract with us, you can, like, no hard feelings. And I was just like, yeah, I'll just find another way. I'll release it myself. And so it was kind of like a soft release. I just put it online, but now a friend of mine's label here in Portland is putting it out like a tape version of it. And I think I'll have some CDs for when I tour Europe in the fall. And so yeah, I have a new album up on my Bandcamp, mikexvx.bandcamp.com. And the songs, like, it's funny too, because a lot of the songs I wrote on there were like written as a joke, but they became like my more popular ones. Like I did an acoustic cover of Cop Killer by Body Count, and that's like quickly became everyone's favorite song. And it's just like, I didn't understand it. I was like, this is like, was totally a joke. Like I learned this like to be funny at a show, and then everybody was like, every time I play now, it's like basically like, oh, let's go see that guy that plays Cop Killer. That's like kind of what I'm being known for now. So but yeah, and then I also have like, I have a Facebook for my music page and for my various other music projects. But my main one, yeah, just my Bandcamp. And Breathe Glass, if you like noise, not a lot of people like noise, but if you like really loud and screechy and weird like soundscapes, things like that, you search Breathe Glass on Facebook, you'll be able to find that as well. And I play guitar in a ska band called Intentional Overtones, and again, I'm going to get a lot of hate mail saying like, ska sucks, man, and everyone's going to quote propaganda at me. I guarantee people are going to say that song, fuck you, Rudy, and and whatever. But whatever. I like ska. I like traditional ska, so I play guitar in this band, and I like it. We're called Intentional Overtones, and we're about to release a new album too, so you can check that out on Facebook as well.
Well, sweet. Wait, hey, if you want, we can throw on a song from your new album at the end here.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I'll just send you guys a link, and you can put whatever song you feel is best suited.
Yeah, definitely. We can do that. We end every episode saying "fuck, shit, damn." Would you mind saying it for us this week?
Just saying those 3 words?
Yep.
Yeah. Fuck, shit, damn.
Sociable and charming, you taught humans to be kind. Rescued from a slaughterhouse is where you lived your life. We awoke one morning to find that you were sick. Though just last night you showed no signs of illness, now it shows. And I lost a friend today. We say goodbye to you, sweet pea, and carry on your name. And I sit together, remember your friends. And I relive all those memories again. Humans come to realize that turkeys are your friends. Supposed to grow to 12, but 3 years is all you live. You have problems with your joints and problems with digestion, problems brought from breeding for massive food production. And though we gave you a good home, we'll keep you in our hearts. We'll show them they were wrong. And I want to shut down all those places you've been. And I make sure they can't do this again.
This week, you heard
Mogwai, 725.
Right now you're listening to
Hot Cross, Frozen by Tragedy. That reminds me of like frozen hot cross buns. And as always,
El Comandantes.
which side are you on?
Frozen hot cross buns.
Hot cross, frozen by tragedy. It's like you accidentally froze your hot cross buns, and it's a tragedy.
That would be a tragedy. I've never actually had a hot cross bun.
I haven't either.
I don't know what that is.
I saw them for sale the other day at the store. They got like crosses on top, I guess. I think they sell them for, what was it, Easter lately?
Like real crosses, like Jesus dead crosses.
I think like, but they're X's, but I think they're sold for
for like Easter or something.
Possibly, I don't know. I could be entirely wrong. I saw a vegan bakery make them too, so
That's interesting. I still want to do the hanging crucifix this year.
I still want to be crucified.
Well, no, because I'm 33 this year, and it's the year that Jesus was crucified,
hilarious.
right? But not. I don't want to do it to like be in touch with Jesus, just to be like I'm better than Jesus because I'll actually live.
Okay.
Yeah,
So you want to be
suspended in a cross, like in a crucifix.
But would you want to do arm suspensions then as well? So you do a suicide with arms?
Yeah, but I don't want to have any of the weight on my arms.
You
so
want
the weight all
want
on my back.
So you want this? It's probably a suicide with arms.
With arms just being held. Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
You could do them on the back of your hands. Even.
I really could. Yeah.
Because you're not putting much weight on them.
Yeah. So that's in my future, hopefully.
I'll do my knees.
You'll do your knees.
I already did a suicide.
You did a suicide suspension, yeah.
So I'm just trying to think what would be. No, actually, I want to do a crucifixion, or not a crucifixion, a resurrection. Sorry.
That's by your stomach, right?
Yeah, you can do the crucifixion, and I'll do the resurrection. Sweet. That'll be great.
That would be great. I like this idea.
Oh, I'm not looking forward to a resurrection, though.
God damn it. It looks like it just is so painful.
Oh, that's right on the stomach, So earlier we talked about protectmypooch.com. They make awesome signs that let people know that you don't consent to searches and that you have a dog on the premises and that they can't trespass.
Yeah. So we're going to be doing a giveaway of one of these signs to someone who follows us on one of our social media outlets. And you can get an extra entry by tweeting it out that, hey, you can get one of these free signs from protectmypooch.com.
So if you repost it, retweet any of the messages that we'll have on our social media, then that'll be an extra entry for you and you could win a sign. So check out protectmypooch.com and follow us on our social medias so that you can enter.
And we'll try to have all the details on whichsidepodcast.com. Fuck, shit, man. Damn.
Which Side is produced by the Which Side Media Collective.